If God has no pleasure in an idol, why does he not make an end of it? The elders replied, if men worshipped a thing of which the world had no need, he would make an end of it. But behold, they worship the sun, moon, and the stars. Shall God destroy his world because of fools? I love that. So the argument was, if these things that people are worshipping in idolism and that is so wrong, and God made things, why is he letting people worship things that are so bad? And the answer is obviously, well, they weren't created bad, and they were not being used for what they should be. So should God destroy everything because idiots destroy and misuse or pervert good things? And it's obviously a rhetorical question that does its job very well. My point is, again, that I'm trying to show you in our discussion about magic is that the heavenly bodies do exert forces on the earth. Nanda, you probably missed this. The definition for people going completely mad, the most popular definition when someone goes mad is we call them a lunatic. And that literally comes from the word luna, from the moon. And this substantiates the claim that the heavenly bodies in the sky do influence things on earth naturally and psychologically. People get influenced. I mentioned too that I've even spoken to some women who, especially those who are into things like occultism and whatever, you might find them more open to speaking about this. They start picking up, and I mean, I can't speak, I'm not a woman, and I'm not expecting either of our two women to feel comfortable themselves speaking about this to confirm this if they've either experienced this themselves or from someone else. But I've spoken to some women who even start saying that not only do they see a syncing with the phases of the moon on their menstrual cycles, I've even heard some women say that with their friends and the people they feel intimately connected with, their girlfriends, they can even see that their cycles start getting into sync. Now that sounds absolutely absurd, and yet it's happening, which proves a point that clearly there's a lot more magic and amazing things happening around us than we might be even comfortable to acknowledge as simply as it is actually happening. That would be my point with that.
Um,
Hello?
Another answer to the statement on the screen was God gave us free choice, absolute choice,
All right. You're
so
right.
that we could come to God or not. It was our choice.
Right.
Is
Um,
our choice.
I, I think this is a perfect opportunity, Kathy, you've created for me to substantiate something I've said with a witness that is online with us now. Dad, can you remember talking to me about the Bible Project and asking on a previous Sabbath session about the credibility of the Bible Project's Tim Mackey? Can you remember that?
Yeah.
Can you guys remember that I said I think he's going to go down the road of Rob Bell?
Yes, you did say that.
Okay. Now, you know what Rob Bell's first big misstep was that really got him out of favor with general Christian community. Rob Bell had a controversial view on the idea of hell. Don't know if any of you know that, but that's what happened. Now, with that little introduction, Nande, quickly fill them in on what you shared with me.
I show then a video which the picture was quoting of Tim Keller, the guy who's in charge of the theological aspect of Bible Project, basically saying that hell isn't a real place. It's a place we create for ourselves. Something along those lines. It wasn't making really much sense. That's why I sent it to Darren to hear what he was thinking about it.
Isn't that interesting? That what I predicted was probably going to happen is happening with such an exceptional mirror image of Rob Bell that you might even think I'm doing magic. So just something to throw out there too. Yeah, is another quote from that same Emmanuel Friedheim Sol. When the Holy One, blessed be he, was revealed at Sinai, the people of the world chose a God for themselves. Some chose the sun, others chose the moon, others chose the stars and signs of the zodiac, while others chose the angels. So this again is a quote from Jewish literature. And the point that I'm showing you here is again, is that my claim from Deuteronomy and so on, that the nations were handed over to the gods, the lesser gods of the divine council or the celestial council, is quite substantiated and furthermore shown with comments like this. And again, obviously the mention of angels here. So the point is, I've said this already earlier now as a recap, is that there were supernatural beings who had knowledge of creation, things that weren't supposed to be necessarily so prematurely given to mankind. I believe eventually, and I've told you guys this before, that eventually they were supposed to be given to us, but not in the time and the way that it was done, which then afforded them the opportunity to become objects of worship themselves. And that's where occultism and all of that comes in. So that's the Watchers story that I'm showing you. And obviously magic, I mean, the dark magic, the dark arts, the occultism is attributed to what these Watchers had shared. So the question again is all the information that they ended up sharing evil, or was their misuse of it and their timing of sharing it the problem for God? And I'm opting for the latter, saying that God created all those realities and that it was eventually meant to be shared, but just not in the way that it was done. So that's part of it. Now I'm going to draw somewhat to a close now, and then I hope to hear what you guys think. I know Gary and Kerry and Nande obviously haven't been on very long, but I trust there's still something you can have to say, I hope. I did say on the group that this was kind of going to be like a very early introduction to Passover, and here it comes. I've established for you the idea that magic can be used by God and is actually created by God. I know it's a very difficult thing to understand when your worldview of that word magic has such negative connotations. I've told you as well that in relation to this idea of magic, that the idea that heavenly bodies relate to what's going on earth, either the physical realm or to us as beings, even spiritually, is unquestionably there. The evidence is there. I've also spoken to you about the fact of the supernatural beings getting involved in the story and influencing magic and being used in all of this way too. But I've also told you that all of this is created by God, that he doesn't endorse evil, but the misuse of what he's created good is used in evil, and in some of the manifestation of it through manipulation of all of these things is called evil and is called magic. And generally magic has become, the word has come to be known as a negative, but I'm suggesting that there's more going on than just that. And I'm not promoting dark magic and evil things and occultism. I'm saying the evidence is there that if God created certain things and there's ways for it to have been done, that ship has sailed of it being done properly from the word go. Obviously, evil has permeated everything, so I'm not denying that. But I just want to show you that actually your whole faith thing, as Gary got right in the first time, which is quite impressive there, is a kind of magic. And yes, I was playing on the Queen song. In fact, I didn't quite have time to finish it. I'd actually, to get into the inspiration of it, and as Kathy pointed out, even music is very powerful to manipulate and change and alter states of mind and influence us, which is a form of magic, literally. So literally, to get into the mood for what I was going to teach on and to construct what I was going to do, I actually literally did listen to a gay queer singer called Freddie Mercury singing It's a Kind of Magic. So can you believe that I used that pervert as an inspiration to complete the teaching? Isn't that a disturbing form of magic? And yet I'm going to confess to you that's exactly what I did. In fact, I was dancing up and down the passage with a broom while I was sweeping, thinking about stuff, even realizing it's ironic that I'm going to talk about magic while working with a broom, given its connection to magic. And then I even started playing some air guitar to the awesome riffs in It's a Kind of Magic, and even started making a video because I wanted to share like a little teaser trailer for tonight. But then it just turned out to be too much work to get all of that synced up to use as an intro to our teaching tonight. So that was comical, and maybe one day, maybe Nande will get to see it first, because if he comes around, I can show you what I was going to do. But my point is, magic is all around us. And depending on how you want to use that term and the negative attachment you have to it or the perception you have of it, it's around. And at its essence, it's taking the elements that God has put in place. It's taking the themes that are present in our gospel. And that's what I'm about to show you. The Ram and the Lamb. It's not a new rap song. Passover. We all know Passover, and we all know the Lamb of Passover. Here's an interesting consideration for you. Does anyone know what was the main god of Egypt? Pharaoh.
Ra.
Wasn't it
Well, Pharaoh obviously sits as the manifestation of certain gods, but
Wasn't it Ra?
Ra.
okay, let me put it a different way. And this is going to give you the answer right now. What was the animal manifestation of the greatest god of Egypt's pantheon? The clue is on your screen.
So it'd be Ra the
Ram?
ram.
The ram. Do you think it's coincidental that God chooses a lamb as the prophetic, call it magical element that was going to save the lives of Jews that night? You really think it was coincidence? If all the 9 times before this, elements of magic and other gods are being used and defeated, do you really think by the 10th plague, God's going to somehow completely change the design of what he's doing? Now, the question is, why did Pharaoh not panic after 9 plagues? Who thinks they can answer that? Why does Pharaoh not panic after 9 plagues of having his ass handed to him? Why is he not worried?
Well, weren't they all, the 9 plagues were all connected to the gods of Egypt?
Right, yeah. So, I mean, if he's had all of
Why-
those wiped out, why is he not nervous for the last one?
Confidence, maybe he's just built, he's
Right, there is a
deluded
confidence,
him.
but he's a religious man. He's a very religious man, and that's the answer. That's part of the answer. Here's the answer. So Patricia Lance is actually an astrologer. So this is the kind of woman you want to talk to. The Hebrew astronomy name of Aries, which is the ram, is Taleh, which means the lamb of the world. What? Huh? Isn't that interesting? What does John call Jesus? The Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world. In the Old Testament, almost all verses that mention lamb refer to a sacrifice. According to fixed star astrologer, Astronomy King, constellation Aries portends events concerning sacred rites and the worship of God. It affects the conditions of the air and the seasons and presages the results of those elements on things that grow, especially the new shoots of arboreal crops. So the Aries in Hebrew is Taleh, which means the Lamb of the world. Isn't that interesting? And here's the question, why didn't Pharaoh panic after the 9th plague? And here's your answer. Tell me when the happy coincidence of the day on which I'm teaching this becomes apparent when I explain the next few seconds to you. You see, if you want to get into magic properly and understand it properly, you have to accept that the planetary movements and position in relation to each other, the planets and stars, and their position and relation to the earth or the sun, all implies things that are happening prophetically, right? Anyone picking up where I'm going with this yet?
Possibly at the moment they're seen by all, but when the closer they get to the earth, the fewer people see.
Right, Kathy. So do you find it, do you get the connection of why I'm telling you that and the day we happen to be on, or that I'm on still?
Yeah.
The reason why Pharaoh wasn't nervous is because he was waiting for the following to happen. The Earth and the constellation Aries to be at its closest point. Because you know what he believed that meant for him? He'd be supernaturally recharged. And if he was supernaturally recharged, this imposing, bullying god who's come and messed with the 9 other gods so far of Egypt would finally be defeated by him. So ironically, Pharaoh had faith. The problem for Pharaoh is that he doesn't realize that the message he got from the stars, or the message that had been twisted from the original story, was originally to imply that that lamb was going to save mankind, and it wasn't a god in itself. Does that make sense? So the original gospel of the stars was twisted, and Pharaoh inherits the perverted pagan version of it, influenced by the demons and the watcher angels who had come, and he buys into that story. When ironically, the original message of that part of the constellations played out prophetically perfectly to save not only Jews at the time of Passover, but effectively also Egyptians and other nationalities who heeded the warning and saw, wait a minute, we've learned wrong. These strange magicians that are living in the midst of Egypt, these Jews and their weird witchcraft of dabbing blood on doorposts and tying lambs to their bedposts for 4 days. This kind of witchcraft in their minds, it would be witchcraft, seems to be the right way to go. You realize that's probably what was going on in their minds.
Darren, isn't it interesting? I don't know if this is connected at all, but isn't it interesting with all this thing about the moon, the lunatic, and that view of things? Like on the 14th of the first month of Nisan, so Passover, God chooses to cast a shadow onto the Earth's shadow onto the moon, causing it to look like blood.
Exactly.
Lunar eclipse. Isn't it amazing? It's
Be-
almost like covering the moon's craziness.
Because Gary, it's a literal message. There's literally a message in the stars. And it's magic. It's a kind of magic. Sorry, I have to. I'm
and
hearing it in
interest
my head. I've just got to
and
do it.
interesting on the Passover when Yeshua was crucified. The same thing obviously will happen because it's the season. So there's another blood moon, but further to that, there's a darkness.
Right. Because it's
Mhm.
magic. Not the negative kind. It's that original, hey, I designed this stuff to be supernatural. And the way I show I'm in charge is by manipulating nature, which is the very definition of magic.
And then you get the resurrection. There was a resurrection there as well.
Yeah. So God didn't pull a rabbit out of a hat, he pulled a Jesus out of a grave. And that is magic. Gary, what I probably didn't tell you guys now, you and Kerry and Nande, because I think we rushed past it. You know that abracadabra actually implies I will bring into being what is spoken. Out of nothing. I will bring into being what will come out of nothing. Did you know that? That's what abracadabra means from the Hebrew. Isn't that interesting?
Would it imply then bringing something that is a reality in the supernatural into the natural? They're not really doing anything quote unquote amazing, if that makes sense. In the
Right.
supernatural sense.
Only if you're looking from God's perspective, meaning for God to pull something from the supernatural into the natural, it's like, yeah, this is what I do. But our perception of it will be overwhelming, and it should be, because we don't have that power. So it all depends on like what perspective you're working from.
I was going to ask this a bit later, but I wanted to. I know it's so funny because I've been thinking about this week. there are rules, and that's what science does, trying to find out the natural rules of what governs this world. And obviously, those natural rules don't apply to the supernatural being, whether the ones who have rebelled or not. But are there, and I guess we wouldn't really know, are there, because Satan, the Watchers, before they were chained, even though they can do supernatural stuff, there still seems to be limitations on what they can and cannot do. And it seems the only person that doesn't have rules in the supernatural or the natural is God.
Right.
But so is it safe to say they are, which they would be, I don't think we could even comprehend, or maybe there's hints of it in the Bible, there are supernatural rules, physics, in the supernatural realm that the supernatural beings are limited by?
Oh, absolutely. And I think the other thing worth noting is that when you talk about the word science, understand that that's a development out of Greek, mainly out of Greek culture, where rationality started taking over and they sought to put everything into neatly defined boxes. And then what you've got into the real age of rationality and into age of enlightenment in Europe, coming out of the Dark Ages, you literally have a total kick up against anything of a supernatural nature, partially influenced by how people of religions had manipulated people. So, I mean, you've got that too, that did influence it. So the idea was basically to kill God. So science at its most inspirational, passionate high is actually trying to kill the supernatural and by definition God, demons, everything actually. But ironically, in that process, they empower demons, if that makes sense, when they're trying to do that. So that's the definition of science in its most extreme usage. It doesn't want to acknowledge the supernatural. That's why scientists will rather scratch their heads bald than acknowledge they're not going to find a rational answer to something, which to me is the height, which makes them all lunatics, because then they are, as we say in Afrikaans, met die maan gepla. They are bothered with the moon, but it, like my father said, it doesn't quite carry the same power as it does in Afrikaans. In Afrikaans, you say someone is met die maan gepla, like I'm saying they are literally bothered with the moon, which is a definition to explain that someone's gone mad, which is not even great, which is not extreme. It's actually quite literally the right way to define lunacy. So, Nandi, I hope that helps. There are, of course, boundaries, even for the supernatural forces. So they misused the knowledge that God gave them access to. I think before you guys got on, I gave an analogy to Kathy that I'll use now again, where I said, if Kathy's kids were young and in the house with her, and Kathy had a secret hiding place for money in her cupboard in her room, and when her kids were around in the room, her love for them and trust of them, she allowed them to see where she puts the money. Does the fact that she allowed them to see where she puts the money preclude their right to go and take that money when she's not there and do with it what they want? Are they allowed to do it because they saw where she put it? That's a question. Nande, can you, or Nande, Gary, or Kerry,
Yeah.
if you get the
That-
question, are they allowed to do with it what
it's-
they want?
The money would be the universal, the 613, well, not all of them, but some of them that apply to the natural. Just the very simple, do not
No, Gary, go behind that. So go way back in history. Imagine that the supernatural watchers are those kids. Use the analogy with them.
okay. So look, but don't touch.
Right. So you've seen it, but that didn't mean I want you to take that unless you hear me say it, take it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
And could it be that we are peeking into the kingdom that is still to come,
Right.
but yet not revealed
Yeah.
fully? So is God just showing, in the sense of the prayer, give us that bread of tomorrow today? You
Right.
know, we are
Yes.
taking a little look at what's
Glimpse.
coming in the messianic kingdom and the world to come.
But we don't
Darren?
get to do what the prosperity preachers do. We demand this. I mean, what's his name? Kenneth Copeland is making a total tort of himself everywhere on the internet for him demanding things. You don't get to do that. Yes, Dad, you wanted to say?
I wanted to say it's in Afrikaans again, sorry, using that, but there's an old saying the older people used to say, vroeg ryp, vroeg vrot.
Ah,
So if you are exposed to something, I'll never forget the instance of a child that was exposed to stuff on Mnet TV when the nanny was, I won't mention names, but a guy working with me years ago, the nanny used to let the kids sit and watch adult content on
yes.
the thing, and they found the child developed awarenesses, shall we just say, and the onset of puberty in a little toddler, which resulted in this child being taken to a child psychologist
Right.
for behavioral problems, which you would not have thought possible. And I would say, I would almost liken it where you have a box of matches in the house and you tell an educated toddler on what amazing stuff you can do with this match. You could light a fire to have a barbecue or braai. You could heat the room. You could light candles.
Yes.
But would it be wise in allowing the kid access to that box of matches when they're 2 years old? You know, it's that sort of thing. And then I think of Enoch, the book of Enoch, and all the revelations that the Watchers taught to the people, the old, the history, the art of war, women putting on makeup and being seductive, all of that stuff. Sort of, I mean, I think of
sharing.
Yeah, I just think of the oil, the fossil fuels. And now we're getting into fossil fuels, we're getting into electric cars. Everything on its time is revealed. It's almost like it's kept secret for a while, and then it's discoveries of penicillin. All of these things seem to have been timed, orchestrated, possibly by a loving God.
You talk about that. One of the most frustrating types of teachers in the world is a rabbi, because rabbis use magic. And by magic, I mean they manipulate nature, they manipulate stories, don't they? What's a parable if not a manipulation of the natural order? Okay. And the other things rabbis do is they do the same kind of slow release process that you're mentioning now. Now, I don't need to mention names because I think you guys can figure out for yourselves. I've had two very zealous students in the years that have passed, and one very recently, both whose impatience mixed, unfortunately, in a cocktail with their arrogance. And they didn't like the pace at which they were learning or the way I'm doing things. And both of them, in fact, cottoned on very quickly to the fact that I do use a form of magic, in the sense that I use my ability in the English language and my understanding of scripture, and what I trust is the gifting from God, and all of these things, and my understanding of psychology and all these things, to evoke different emotions out of them at different times. That was always very purposeful, and I never hid it from them. So it wasn't hidden, as I've said previously to Kathy on this teaching. It wasn't occultic in that way. And both of them walked away sadly. Because you know why? They want to do the control. And unfortunately, prematurely, they want to control the one teaching them. And what is it that Jesus said? Students never greater than their master. And that doesn't mean that the master or the teacher is more important or worthy of worship necessarily. It's just the process of how things get done. It's the created order of God.